So in this video, we're going to describe the transformation of a parent graph by being given the graph of the child graph. So here you're going to see that we have a variety of children graphs. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 child graphs, and they're all referring back to this parent graph over here that is in red. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at each child graph, and we're going to decide how that child graph was altered in order to create it. How did we take that parent graph and how did we alter it to create the child graph? So we're going to start by looking at example 1. And what I notice here between the child graph and the parent graph is that they both have a vertex at 0, 0. So what that's telling me is that there are no graph movements here. It didn't move left or right. So what that means is that there's no movements here, and all I'm looking for is some sort of stretch or shrink. And I'm going to focus on the vertical ones because those are a little bit easier for me to identify. So if I look at the patterns here, what I tend to do is I tend to focus on the first point that is after the vertex. So what I notice here is that there's a point here at 1, 1 and negative 1, 1. So what I notice is that to create that point, I go over 1 and then I go up 1. And what I notice here with my child graph is I go over 1, but I'm actually going up 2 to the point 1, 2. So if you notice here, this has a point of 1, 1, and our child has a graph point of 1, 2. And hopefully you're noticing that 2 is 2 times bigger than 1. We created that by multiplying our 1 value here by 2. So because we made it 2 times as tall, we have a vertical stretch here. So we have a vertical stretch, and then this is by a factor of 2. So if you look, you'll notice that it is twice as tall. This one only went up to 1, but this one went up to 2. So that's our only transformation there for child graph number 1. So now let's take a look at child graph number 2. So what I notice here is that my vertex is not at 0, 0 like it was before. My vertex has been moved to the left 3, so I'm going to say that I moved left 3, and then it moved down 2. So I can see that change. I can see that my vertex moved, and as a result, I can describe what I'm seeing on the screen. Then from here, I need to make sure that there isn't some sort of vertical shift in there. So if I take a look again, remember I'm looking for this pattern, I notice here that from my vertex to the next point, I went over 1, up 1. So over 1, up 1. If I look here, I'm looking for that same pattern. If I don't have that same pattern, then there's some sort of vertical stretch. But I notice here I go over 1 and up 1, and I end up at my next point. And as a result, there is no vertical stretch or shrink in problem number 2. So now if I move on, I'm going to look at graph number 3 here. And what I notice is that this graph is flipped over, and it's flipped over, so here it was up here above the x-axis, and it's now been flipped over to beneath the x-axis. So this is a reflection. You can write about or in the x-axis. And then I need to check and make sure that there's no other changes. So it hasn't been moved, so I can see the vertex is still here at 0, 0. So it hasn't been moved. And I need to make sure that there isn't any stretching going on. So here, if I look, remember, we're looking for this same pattern here of it went over 1 and then up 1. So here it's going to go down 1, but I'm looking for 1, 1. And it looks like it's got that exact same pattern, so there isn't any sort of stretching or shrinking happening here. And last but not least, let's take a look here at number 4. So what I'm noticing right away with number 4 is that the graph is flipped over, so it's going to be a reflection in the x-axis, because it's a reflection over that x-axis. Then I also notice that the vertex is not at 0, 0, but it's been moved up 4. So I can see it's been moved up 4 units. So it doesn't have any horizontals because it's on the y-axis still, But lastly, what I need to take a look at is I need to look at the patterns. And remember, my pattern is always over 1, up 1. And here I notice if I go over 1, it goes down about 3. And because it's 3 and not 1, what we have here is a vertical stretch by a factor of 3. So we can see those vertical stretches and shrinks by just knowing that we should go over 1, up 1 to find our first point, and noticing some differences. So here it went over 1 and then down 3 instead. So it's 3 times taller and it's being stretched to 3 times its normal height.